Hello, and welcome to a very special edition of Poems On. This is the ninth show. We're nearing the end of the third season. And in a little bit of a departure from tradition, I'm bringing back the very first guests that we had on the show 3 years ago.
Right.
That's Rhina Espaillat and Alfred Nicole. And for a theme, we have a little different theme. This is called favorites. And what I'm asking each of us to do is to read our personal favorites from our own work. I think it's going to be very interesting to see how we view our own work and maybe explain why our preferences are what they are. So I will begin by asking Rhina to start us off because she has pride of place.
Thank you very much for inviting me to open this. It's always a joy to be on this show, always. I'm going to begin with a poem that's really pretty old, and there is a shocking quality to it because of its name. Is everybody ready? This is the only almost not quite proper poem that I've ever written because it's called Bra. And it's called Bra because it happened. It came to my mind because I was trying on underwear in a local department store, and these are my thoughts. Bra. What a good fit! But the label says Honduras. Alas, I am union forever. Yes, both breasts and the heart between them, committed to U.S. labor. But such a splendid fit. And the label tells me the woman who made it, bronze as the breasts now in it, speaks the language I dream in. I count in Spanish the pesos she made stitching this breast divider. Will they go for her son's tuition? Her daughter's wedding. The thought is a lovely fit, but oh, the label. And oh, those pesos that may be pennies and hard-earned. Was it son or daughter who made this? Unschooled, unwedded. How old? 14? 10? That fear is a tight fit. If only the heart could be worn, like the breast, divided, nosing in two directions for news of the wide world, sniffing here and there for justice, for mercy. How burdened every choice is with politics, guilt, expensive with duty, heavy as breasts in need of this perfect fit whose label says Honduras.
Thank you.
Right, I should be blushing, but I'm not. And of course, this is a sort of a political poem, and I have been a union organizer for the teachers, not for the bra makers, but one worker is like another, and I feel very responsible for the work and the pay that other people get for working and the treatment they get while they're working. So this is a kind of argument with myself. Do I think of my own figure, economically too? Am I talking about money, or am I talking about the shape of the body? Well, maybe both. But what should I really be thinking about? I should be thinking about the people making what I'm buying, and who they are, and how they do the job, and whether the job is paying them what they should. So it's very simple.
Wow. Now, did you buy the bra that inspired this?
That's a tough question. No, I did not.
And that's because it had the Honduras label.
Yes, because it did. Because I knew in my heart's core that those people were not getting what an American worker would have gotten.
Right.
So I bought the other one.
Ah, very good. I have one other small question. I can readily believe that you dream in Spanish. Do you also sometimes dream in English?
I dream in both languages.
In the same dream sometimes?
Sometimes there's no speech at all. Sometimes it's just action.
Sure.
But language creeps in one way or the other. Being bilingual is an adventure.
Mhm.
I'll have to take your word for it. I've lost. I once had a pretty good command of German, but lack of use has made it go away. Although my accent is still very good, but my as we used to say, die Wortschatz ist verloren. The vocabulary is gone,
Gone,
so
yeah.
it's
How
hard
many
to talk
languages?
without. Pardon?
How many languages do you manage?
I really only manage English and music.
That's a big
But
language.
that's the real one.
Yeah.
It's a great That's a great language. That's where I put my time and my effort, and that's where I'm much closer to being fluent in music than I ever was in German.
Yeah.
Um, so, but uh,
You know what makes that poem, as you said, it's a political poem, but it's unlike many political poems, it really is a poem. And yes, you said it's an argument with yourself, because Yeats said rhetoric is argument with other people, and poetry is an argument with yourself.
That's true.
And so it's obviously
Yeah.
a political poem for certain, but the whole argument is with yourself, and you see these concerns that come up, and the evasions, the attempted evasions.
Yeah.
It's just great. Yeah.
But when you try the evasions, they don't work because I'm a mother. And I was thinking, were these objects made by
yes,
children who were not getting married, who were not paying for weddings, who were not going to school, maybe the first in the family? And I thought, no, I really have no right to think of myself at this point.
well, I think it's safe to say that the bra manufacturers have not been put out of business by people of your morals.
Mhm. Yeah.
They're buying the ones made in Honduras without stopping to go through the argument with yourself that you show us in this poem. In fact, there's no argument at all. So,
Well, the argument is double because you think maybe this is a work of supererogation. Maybe I'm fussing over this because I assume that the employer is being a louse. But
yes.
maybe he's not. Maybe he's one of the fair ones. Maybe these people really are earning enough. Maybe it would be right for me to buy from another country.
But that's not the way to bet.
Yeah, she doesn't place her bet that way. But the great thing about it is that there is no easy answer.
Mm.
Yeah.
And so it's really the speaker is living in a real world where you have to go with the best bet, but it's
Yeah,
still a bet.
right,
Yeah.
right.
Well, that's what's refreshing about it because it isn't just a polemic. It's grounded in the humanity of the actual workers. And that's what gets overlooked. So you don't overlook, and that's much to your credit. And then on top of that, you didn't buy that bra. So now you
That's
didn't.
not in the poem.
No, it isn't in the poem. That's why I took the opportunity to ask you because I knew you were not going to disappoint me.
Well, everybody asks me anytime I read this,
Really?
even in a huge auditorium, somebody always raises a hand. And did you buy it?
Yeah.
Well, you could have thought about that ahead of time. It would have been one more reason not to buy it.
Right.
Wow. Well, this is a great way to kick off the proceedings. So I will go to guest number 2, second in line, but not in our hearts.
I hope not.
What you got, Alf?
All right. I'm going to start with my of the poems that I'm going to read today. This is the earliest of them. It's called Guinea Pig, and one of the reasons why it's just a favorite of mine is because it was a successful poem written in form and meter. So, I mean, with rhyme and meter. I mean, there's a whole lot other things about it, but I'm going to read it first. Guinea pig, a pet, domesticated overmuch, inhabiting interminable lulls, most pusillanimous of animals, inertia's own, quiescent as the sands, and shy to venture even round the hutch. Her pleasure is a motor in my hands, an instrument set racing with a touch. A little thing of breath and heat compact, mildest of spirits in a flask of fur, without even a sound as signature, no bark or whinny, whistle or meow, no word to instigate or to react. She gently nods assent to here and now, an answer well considered and exact. I'll learn from this one how much not to do, how large a silence to accumulate, to serve with those who only stand and wait, to change alfalfa, sawdust, water, salt, for other needs as moderate and few, to thrill when lifted, visited, exalt, nor ever speak till I be spoken through.
Mm. Yeah. Well, the language verges on the Shakespearean, the way that you use compact for one very tiny example.
That's taken right from Herbert. So I got Herbert and Milton, and they were they're very important poets for me as a reader, but not as a writer, because you and I was speaking earlier, I was a free verser for at least 20 years. So when I turned formalist, I touched base with those guys.
Wow.
Usually it works the other way. The free verse poets get better because they start with form. But this guy would have ended up perfect no matter what he started with. Really, really, I think it's a
Yeah, I was surprised when he told me that he had been a free verser for that long,
yeah.
Because you get comfortable in your ways after 20 years. You've certainly come to identify yourself, if you're going to identify yourself with your manner, this is what I do. You could be excused for saying that to yourself, but you went in another direction, and it's not exactly Saul of Tarsus.
Yeah, but you really do feel as though you're betraying something when you make the switch. You really do.
Yeah, see, I didn't go. I wrote free verse until I was about 25, and so I wasn't at it long enough to feel like I was giving up anything of great historical, personal history. But that's 20 years is a good chunk. Well, yeah, the language here is so.
Perfect.
You've heard me refer to you as a jeweler, and I say that because the words are perfectly set.
Yes.
You know.
What I love about this poem, among many other things, is the fact that it ends up being religious. It has a religious touch to it without saying a word
Yes.
about an institution or a faith or a series of things that you must do. Because that end is perfect. Spoken through is what brings the religion into the poem. It says, we don't necessarily invent what we say. We are spoken through many times. Many of the important decisions we make in our lives are made by the voice that speaks through us, not
Certainly. Yeah.
and this little animal is obedient, is perfectly obedient. This is a kind of the animal version of genuine faith.
That's true.
You know, but
and you,
as a poet, is an actual poetic criticism that you can make, a devastating criticism that you can make, or you think you're going to make, by asking this question. Well, the metaphor is that you're like the guinea pig and you're going to get spoken through. How did the guinea pig get spoken through? Right? But the answer is that poem spoke through the guinea pig.
Yes.
So so that what happens in the poem is itself
The voice.
yeah, that's so
yeah,
that so
yeah,
the poem's talking about what's happening in that poem.
yeah. I especially, I always like it when what appears to be about one thing is then brought round near the end to an insight that makes you reevaluate everything that you've been given before. And that's definitely what you're doing here. And Rena, I think you're exactly right. There's uh, the soul of uh, the soul of the acolyte or the penitent or the believer has to attain to this level of humility
Yeah.
that you're ascribing to the guinea pig, and and that really comes through at the end, just as you say, Rena. Because I mean, small faith and big institution faith are not the same.
No, they're not.
So,
Yeah.
well, thank you. This is you two are setting a brutally terrifying pace.
Well, I wanted to say also that the description of the animal herself in the hands, the tremor of
Yes.
the little animal, you feel that you are not only holding it, but you are it. You are the animal at that moment.
Yeah, it's all of that.
I think it's a
It's
perfect poem.
yeah, it's multi-layered. I mean, it folds back in on itself, whichever way you look at it.
Yeah.
There's another way to look at it. So yeah,
Yes.
and I also found it interesting that the reason that you chose it was its place near the beginning of your essay into form.
Yeah. You know, I would like to add one last thing about the high honor that this poem has received. Deborah Warren has it pinned to her guinea pig cage.
Really? That's great. That's well, for this poem, there can be no higher fate. That's great.
Mhm.
Wow. Well, like I say, it's a punishing pace you've set. So the first thing I'm going to read, because although my family is transplanted from the old world, I did grow up in New England, and I did grow up during the later life of Frost, and he's certainly one of my big influences. And so this is a flipping over the coin of a very famous Frost poem. I investigate the underside, which is a bit different. And this is called After the Group, the Individual. Nature's gold at first is green, last solid color to be seen. The single-minded leaves agree to stand together on the tree until a voice of ice is heard to whisper a divisive word. The dawn arrives when each leaf finds the chills instilled a change of mind. Then scarlet tinted, many hued, each burns according to its mood. And proving rules about perfection, a private choice available to all, which when attained must bring about a fall, insists on making its exception.
I think of, what it makes me think of when we were second graders, we were all running together in a pack in the schoolyard, And then that's when we were green. When we were green. And then we turned our other colors, our varied colors, and we're not running in a pack anymore.
Yeah. Well, that's a bigger movement that the trees go through and we go through. And I mean, it's one of those natural dynamics that everything together one way, everything apart another way.
Yeah.
And like so much in nature, in reality, it has a good side and a bad side, because it is good to be individual, to make up your own mind, to make your own choices, be your own person. But it's so comforting to run in a pack.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I
And
mean,
that has a
that's,
big danger there,
Oh,
too.
yeah, dangerous, dangerous, but comforting.
yeah, well, it's in the comfort lies the danger.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah. But, yeah, this is, of course, the other reason why I chose this is that trees are the cardinal image of my youth, of my life, because my father was, quote unquote, a tree man. You know, he was the superintendent of parks in my hometown. He was responsible for all the trees on city land. And we lived in a house connected to a barn where he had 15 men who worked for him, taking care of trees all around the city. When there were storms and trees were blown down, they went out and cut them up and restored sidewalk traffic. And he was a past president of the Massachusetts Tree Wardens and Foresters Association. So trees were that was his bread, and trees were his bread and butter, so to speak. And that's the shadow I grew up in. So
So
I
you're
still,
going way back with this poem.
Yeah.
in a way, I am. Yeah, in a way. But I mean, I feel a very strong affinity for the nature of trees. And, you know, I have a few other poems that are about that. The tree that didn't know it was a fruit tree that I've read in front of you guys is another example about the nature of, that's another one about the personality as it undergoes a transformation. Because the fruit tree grows up among evergreens and doesn't realize that it's not an evergreen until it
I love the
bears
way
fruit.
I love the way you have the trees thinking and making mistakes when they
Yeah,
think.
yeah.
Well, of course, that was done way before me, and I did it. Tolkien was writing, but I wasn't aware of him when he had his whole race of trees, sentient trees. But yeah, they mean a lot to me. So that's where I chose to start. Shall we go to the next round?
Sure.
What do you got, Rena?
I've got a poem called Calculus.
Oh,
And this
yes.
is another mother poem, because it was about 2 a.m. and I was getting ready to go to bed. I was still marking papers at that point. And I saw my younger son, Warren, sitting on the couch, doing things on paper. And I saw that it was a series of numbers and symbols and things, and it had tails, and the tails were coming out this way. I don't know anything about math, but my kids are wonderful mathematicians. They're both physicists, and they're much smarter than their mother
And they both ended up at MIT.
at MIT.
Yes.
So I'm watching Warren do this, and I said to him, "Tell me I'm not going to understand it, but tell me what it is you're doing." And he said, "I'm doing something called calculus." I said, "Calculus, all right, that's an interesting word. What does it mean?" And he said, "Well, it's about, let's see, how shall I explain this? It's about putting together things that are never going to come exactly together, things that are going to be separate no matter how hard you try to make them one. And the number gets smaller and smaller, but when you think you've got it made and you're going to unite those two things, whatever they are, they separate. There's a space between them." I said, "Well, that reminds me of a lot of things that you could make a poem out of." And the poem I made is this one. And it went through all kinds of tunnels of meaning and tunnels of feeling. And I should say that my kids are marvelous. This is the baby. The baby. He's 68 now.
Okay.
Calculus. Look, said my son, think of it as a line looped back and forth to bridge an open space, unbridgeable at last, but narrowed fine and finer with each passing of the lace, almost to zero, which can never be. Why not, said I. That would be certainty, absence of error. It would be too much to hope for. Then you orbit round your aim, seeking, like Moses, what you'll never touch? Or like a poet, hunting for the word to reproduce a song he thinks he heard and send it hunting in the hearer's mind? Right, laughed my son. We play the self-same game. Sometimes I think the game is all we find, whether we search for song or sign or zero. In the still house, we talked into the night. Before I left him, stalking unafraid, some stubborn truth flicking its dragon tails across the page before him. My young hero, so thinly armored in the flesh I made. My small moon, gone so far and grown so bright above my gaze, lighting his awesome skies where I can wield no sort of telescope. Pondering now what love could be that fails as fail it must to seize the flying prize and yet endures, cradling the heart like hope. I tell my son, think of it as a line weaving between your orbiting and mine. And the reason I ended that way, well, you can see how the poem is laid out. It's got a big clump on the top, a medium clump in the middle, and then that little short thing at the end.
Yeah.
There you go. Now we can see it.
Yeah. So he was giving me the heavy stuff, the mathematics. Okay, the impossible thing that you keep thinking is going to be possible someday. And then you got that second third that makes me look not at the math, not at what I'm being taught, which I will never learn, but at the person who is doing the teaching and how he feels about math the way I feel about poetry.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
We have these conversations very often, and neither one of us really knows how to handle the other guy's famous love.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's happening between two speakers that are as close as two speakers can possibly be. It's a mother and a son.
Yeah.
So can you imagine how that is between all human beings? We just have this calculus thing that might get us closer,
I know.
and but a certainty's never allowed.
That's
and
right.
good thing, because
Is it a good thing?
yeah, because my favorite quote of all time is Isaac Bashevis Singer saying, "No person ever truly knows another." And that's important, because if you think that you know somebody, well, then you could make the decisions for somebody. You rob their dignity, you rob them of their individuality. That's a nice thing that calculus can bring us closer. That's this spiritual calculus can bring us closer and closer and closer, but it can't get there.
It can't get
there.
Get inside. Can't get inside.
I mean, in a very deep way, I don't want to be understood.
Yeah, you don't. Not altogether. You want to be.
I do. I say I do, and I do up to a point.
Yeah.
Well,
but not through and through.
This is where we differ, because I do want to be understood. I do want whoever I love most, and these are the people I love most in the world: my children, my husband. And I would love to be able to get under that skin and say, here's what I'm thinking right now. But you can't.
No.
Right. Well, that's it. You can get close. You can approach it, as they say in math, asymptotically.
Yeah.
It gets closer and closer and closer, but it's never zero.
And then it says, oops, that's where the door is.
Well, it was fascinating for me to listen to you writing about math, writing about calculus, because I studied calculus, and you write about it in language that turns it into poetry.
Yeah. You absolutely
But you
did.
see, I was trying so hard because the people I love most are the ones that I want to understand me 100%.
Sure.
When I talk to I used to tell my husband, "Oh, you want to hear the new one? Yeah, yeah, let's hear the new one." I would read it, and I knew that the excitement was in me, but not in him. He was thinking about something else because he had his own loves, and we are
Yes.
entitled to our own loves, all of us.
So what was his stance towards poetry? Was he moved by it because it was yours? Did he have an affinity for it outside of that or not?
He loved it because he knew I loved it, and because he
Right.
loved me. But he never picked up a book of poetry because he had to, the way I have to. I have to read all the poetry I can find.
Sure.
It's what I eat. But he eats other things. He used to eat painting, for example, and sculpture, which is what he did. That was his art.
Yes.
Art was sculpture, as you know, and politics, and all of what's going on in the world.
But he did glory in your success.
But he
He
did. He
gloried
did.
in it.
He was delighted, but he didn't understand quite why.
Okay. So let me turn that question around. Did you have an affinity and an understanding of his loves? So what was your stance towards sculpture,
Oh,
his sculpture?
I love all the arts. I am in love with all the arts because for me they're all one and they all start with music.
So you were a good audience for his sculpture.
Yes. And
Maybe a
he was
better audience for his sculpture than he was an audience for your poetry.
well, he was a very loving audience because he wanted to make me happy. But like my children, they really had very different loves.
Yes,
I had a scientific side also. I could very easily have become a biologist because I loved the living sciences.
makes sense. Life sciences does make sense.
Yeah, those that could have pulled me away from writing, but it never did. Thank you.
Yeah. See, going back to calculus, when I said I studied calculus, that's because when throughout my entire childhood, I believed I was going to become a theoretical physicist. I thought
No,
I would do what your sons do,
isn't
but
that something?
yeah, and so when I hear you writing about calculus in poetry, it reminds me that essentially what I've done is I've used the mind of a scientist as a poet. In other words, I didn't keep on in the science. I was a physics major for the first half of my freshman year at Brown, and then I became a creative writing major after Christmas, and that suited me much better. But what happened was I realized that I was fascinated by the concepts metaphorically rather than intrinsically.
So so without your own knowledge, you were thinking poetry as you were in love with science.
I thought it was science, but yeah, I was looking at science as a poet.
Yeah, that's a kind of infidelity, isn't it?
Well, yeah, but science has blundered along without my assistance.
In your, in your case, science was the wife and poetry was the mistress.
Your poetry is my big blonde, so to speak. Um,
So great.
that's good.
Yeah.
Um, well, anyway, great calculus. Um, Mr. Nicole, your next offering, please.
Okay. So what I've got next for us is we'll get way far away from science. How's this? This one is The Magician's Bashful Daughter.
Ah, yes.
I'm going to read the poem before I talk about it.
Sure.
Yeah, this one needs it.
In 1 second, if you don't mind. Okay, here we go. The moon. So it's The Magician's Bashful Daughter. The moon looks kindly on this slender reed, fair and fairy-like, and like the moon when, thin as air, it braves the afternoon, advancing while appearing to recede. The bashful daughter of Le Grand David appears on stage to disappear, for soon she'll step inside the coffin-like cocoon to be sawn through and not be seen to bleed. Reopening the door, her father beams with more than showman's pride to find her sound, her slippered feet touched lightly on the ground. She smiles, with braces on. How real she seems. Oh, but the moon is swift to make its round, and she is only changefulness and dreams.
Ah, it's so beautiful.
It almost hurts.
Wow. You know, she smiles with braces on does consciously, for a moment, change the spell that you've cast. And then at the very moment that you introduce the braces, you complete the line with how real she seems, because that's exactly what the introduction of the braces does for the reader. It crystallizes the image into a real connection, as opposed to the more general imagery, the metaphorical content of the imagery. So you did all of that just in that one line. It's a great thing to see done.
Do you know what I was really, this poem was not written about that girl. It was written about the girl who lived down the street. And it was actually my ex-wife who noticed how changed she had become from the summer previous, when she was a carefree girl, and she had just now suddenly become a young woman, albeit a very young woman, you know. So I wanted to write about her, but I had to dramatize it somehow. So in this sonnet, what I did is the Le Grand David, you know about him, right? He is a real magician who had a long running show in Beverly. And
Yeah, I didn't know, but there are many musicians of like
yeah.
type.
So he had a daughter who was in a show, and she really did get in the coffin. I mean, in the you know, that thing that they saw.
The box,
You
yeah.
get in the box and they saw him in half, and you step out still whole, you know. So, but if you put you have that break between the octet and the sestet. What a great place for her to be in the box for a moment, right?
Yes,
She
yes.
comes back out, she's somebody else. That's the, you know, the first summer is in the first in the octet, and then second summer is in the sestet. She's somebody
Wow.
now. She came out,
Yeah.
you know.
Seen not to bleed.
Appears on stage to disappear. Yeah, I mean, this is such a feast for the imagination. I mean, it conjures up so much beyond the boundaries of the lines themselves. I mean, we really feel like we're in the grip of a different kind of presence. I mean, a kind of a magical presence. By that I mean the poem itself, not only the presence of the daughter. But yeah, wow. And then, of course, you're tipping your hand when you use the word cocoon at the end of the octet. In case we didn't get
it. Right. In case you didn't get it. A coffin-like cocoon. Because in the cocoon, what goes in the cocoon doesn't come out.
No, it comes out, but differently.
Yeah.
Yes.
It has become something else. And I wonder if that circle doesn't get larger, the metaphor of that circle gets larger, because don't we all end up as something different?
Well, we all go through a change, greater or lesser, more or less dramatic, more or less profound. And we've got the changes that we go through that are our birthright as humans. So we go through the 7 stages, as Shakespeare put it. And those alone are changes that a lot of people can no longer recognize when they've changed the person that they were before they changed. And that isn't only about the coming on of maturity as you have it here, but it also is about the loss of youth and also about the regrets of middle age, etc. So this is grounded in some very, very deep dynamics that as I say, they're ours because we're human. And then the use of the moon is great. You know,
The moon's like a kindly overseer, because he's very much involved. He's very much involved. If he's looking at her, he looks kindly on her at the beginning, but he's actually making so much of this happen.
Well, and you don't just use the moon in its customary position in the night sky. You use the moon when it's braving the afternoon. And if I understand it right, you're talking about those moments when in the middle of a daytime sky, you still see the moon sometimes.
Barely.
Yeah, it comes on.
But barely, because it's competing with so much other light.
Mm.
But that's a particularly transient essence of the moon.
Yeah.
And so for me, the emphasis is on the change to come, because I associate the moon with changes. But then this is even a more refined. I mean, you're refining the image, and I'm not sure I've ever encountered this particular phenomenon of the moon's image, but it's perfectly used here, and maybe that's why I haven't seen it before, because the call for it was not as apt anywhere else.
This is a kind of poem that has many paths emerging from it. You can have all sorts of conversations about this poem.
Yeah, the last couple of lines, of course, are echoes of Yeats to me. What is it? Tread carefully because you tread on my dreams. One of those poems where he's talking about the moon, or that great poem about Minalouche, the cat, where the moon is reflected in the eyes of Minalouche, the cat, and the end of it is what is it? Looks up at the changing moon with her changing eyes.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean and I love that kind of language out of Yeats. So it gives me some of that. I mean, it's very rich. So now, why did you choose it among all the other worthy candidates?
Well, yeah, let me see. I know I had a reason. I had a reason.
You can make one up on the spot. We're not going to know.
Well, it just was it was a real it was as well as I had ever worked with metaphor.
Yeah.
And that conscious decision, knowing that I had a subject, but that I couldn't actually write about that. If I had just written about the girl on the street, wouldn't have gotten very far. You had to come up with this. You had to come up with a metaphor to make this thing, to get across what you were trying to say. So I guess it's because I was able to pull that off.
Is it fairly early on with your engagement with metaphor, or?
Well, this one
or
is
not?
It's from my first book, but I mean, I've been engaging with metaphor. I mean, I've been a poet forever. I was a poet for good when I was 16 years old. That was it, for good or bad. But and so it was a whole lot of bad. And this is a real instance of good. So I like it,
Okay, but you, as a free verser, you were metaphorically inclined as a free verser as well.
Yes, of course. Yeah. I mean, you can't really write a poem.
Well, you say of course, but there are lots of people who have no nose for metaphor, whatever they're writing in. So that's why I ask. It didn't arise in you as a function of form. It might have been conditioned
Yeah,
as a function of form,
right.
but it was there to begin with.
Yeah. What form
Yeah,
did for me is whenever I was writing in free verse, what I had form. I was breathing in and writing what came out on the out breath.
sure.
So that had that measure. It always was a measure there. But depending on your physiology, if you've been running or if you've been excited or if you're tired, your breath is all different. So you
Right.
couldn't go back into those poems and revise them very well because there was no exterior kind of measure. So the thing that form and meter did for me is it allowed me to work on a poem, go back to a poem and go back in there. And so then, metaphor can grow if you're returning to a work.
Wow.
It's
That's great. Yeah, I mean that's a great insight for those people watching who might not be poets themselves or who are poets who are contemplating trying out form. Um, yeah, that's a good thing to have on the record, so to speak.
I've
But
told my students,
please,
I've told my students on occasion that poetry is not written with the mind, it's written with the body.
yes,
And to a certain extent, that's right, because the thing that did this to me for poetry, the thing that called me into it so that I couldn't resist, was the dance of it.
yes.
I would listen to people reciting, not understand a word because I was 4 or 5 years old, but I took to dancing to it because I could easily hear the drum beats, and to me,
Yes.
it was music. It was music, and my body responds to music. It took me until I was 7, 8 years old, maybe, to say, "Holy smoke! This is not for dancing. This is for thinking and for feeling. This is about human life."
Yeah, it's also for thinking and for feeling.
It's
But
also,
it should also be for dancing, and I think a lot of people have lost that, which is unfortunate.
yeah, and I think that's one of the things
Yeah.
that Alfred does very well. That he can dance and think at the same time.
Yeah. And they've also lost the dance in music itself, the sense of dance. At least in jazz, which I play, it's gotten away from in the earlier days and the style that I play in. We always played for dancers.
Yeah,
As soon as the audience sat on chairs and didn't move, something went out of it. You know. Uh,
yeah. I want you
yeah.
to know that when I put on your discs, you've given me quite a few, and I love them. When I put them on, I can't sit on the couch and listen. I have to get up and dance. And I'm all by myself in the house.
Well, thank you for that because, and just so you don't feel so, if you're inclined to feel lonesome in that by being that way, when I used to go see my friends play before I started to play again myself, because I put down the horn for 5 years and then I made friends who were musicians, and I would go to see them play. I can't be in a place listening to music and not be moving. I mean, I'm not going to stand up and make people look at me by dancing unless it's suitably dark. But but I'm I'm possessed. I
Yeah.
cannot sit still, and I'm possessed by the rhythm of the music. And so uh, maybe that's why my friend said to me one day, "Didn't you used to play an instrument?" And I said, "Well, yes, but I put it down." He said, "Well, you could pick it up," and he was right.
Good friend.
Um,
Good friend.
yeah, well, yeah, and he is still somebody that's very, very dear to me.
Well done.
Well, to build on something, Alf, that you said about um, not being able to go back into the free verse poems, but being able to go back into the ones that are in form. The one that I'm going to read next was originally written in free verse, and then I rewrote it in meter, and it was very hard to do that. So I can appreciate what you're saying. Um, but this is called New Worlds Rewritten. And the reason that I want to read it is that a lot of people have seen me read, I hardly ever read love poems. And that isn't because I don't have any, but the ones that I have are from rather far back. And this one is from rather far back. But it just goes to show you that I have done it, and I allow as how I could do it again, but I have not done it lately. So, New Worlds Rewritten. This is another one of those poems that was written for a woman for whom it did not have its intended effect. On whom it did not have its intended effect, but I don't think that's the poem's fault. New Worlds Rewritten. No, my love, we didn't invent spring. But as earth puts up shoots and trees awaken from winter dreams to find our love alive, they are reminded what the spring is for. My heart's bred. No, I never said that I invented love. But as ours, which began on peaks and ended in the sky, prepares to fall on peaks again, as patiently our children wait outside of time until they can begin to wait in it for their own tender hands and tiny beating hearts. Every particle of joy we'll have together swarms to you from the future in a rush, renumbers your heart bit by bit, creates another beating in its place, one that will tell you soon that you have loved me always. Your eyes widen and soften, and I hear the bells that ring out at the ends of wars. I smell dinner in your touch. Our bodies weave together. Your face blooms into its joy, and we become what those explorers who discovered new worlds thought they'd found.
Yeah, the lovely, lovely lines are when your eyes widen and soften, and I hear the bells that ring out at the ends of wars. And then you really bring it almost right into the kitchen, of course. and that's true. That's so real. But the line right before, it's almost the exact opposite of what I said you were talking about me making something real and then turning it dream.
Yeah.
The line right that ends the strophe right before your eyes widen, and you say these things, this joy that swarms to you from the future in a rush will tell you soon that you have loved me always.
Oh,
that right there,
that's a killer.
Yeah, because it really makes the poem wishful thinking.
Yes.
And then you've already hinted that this love of ours that started on the peaks and then rose from there and then fall on the peaks again. You've already hinted that this may not work. And then, but these things are going to tell you that you have loved me always. It's such a wish, an
Yes.
association of a wish,
It's painful.
Yes.
And then,
yes.
That's the vision. The last stanza is the vision of the wish come true,
Yes. Yeah. Well, there was a lot of pain that occasioned the inspiration of this poem. And so, of course, it had to find its way into it.
Yeah.
And although you can put it, as you did, Alf, and call it a wish, there's also an element of kind of bold prediction.
Yeah.
This is what's going to happen. I'm certain of this.
Prediction.
Yes, a bold. Nicely put. And wait, I want to condition it. An ill-fated, bold, wishful prediction. Yeah, because this did not end as I hoped that it would. But
things don't.
Well, many things don't. As I always say, every situation prior to the one that lasts cannot last by definition, or you would never get to the one that lasts.
Yeah.
So talk about a bold prediction. I can say that, not ever having been married. But yes, this was it was a bear to put into meter. And there are still, and I was able to keep a lot of the lines I like the best, but there are still some lines in the free verse original that I think are better than what I was able to do here. Because as I say, it started out, I think this was written about 45 years ago. It's quite old. And it was rewritten maybe 15 years ago. So there you go. That's why it's New Worlds rewritten. I think originally it was called New Worlds. But
that's funny because it wouldn't have occurred to me that that's why, because it does work as a title, doesn't it? I mean, even if it weren't.
Yeah, if you didn't know that it's a rewritten version.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. There's something that I'm trying to capture in the last line about the vision that the explorers coming to the New World had of what they were discovering, and how over time that vision was to be proven false, and so that's what prompted me to say the thing at the end, to say that we become what they thought they'd found, because what they found was not what they thought they found, but we're the genuine article. Just another way in which I happen to be wrong, but
I don't know if you're wrong. I don't know if you're wrong. I think we are the thing that was much better than the little bits of gold they found, because we became the world's most mixed people.
Yes, that's true.
The core of the human family, because there's a little bit of everything in it.
Yep. That's people should pay more attention to that truth, particularly over the next week.
Please.
I shouldn't say that because, of course, we're recording this before a particular event, but it will be broadcast after a particular event. And I don't want to make any bold predictions about.
Yeah, we don't trust your bold prediction.
Well, you shouldn't. I have the track record to prove you shouldn't. Okay, well, enough for my contribution. Let us begin with Rhina once more. You can lead us out of this wood.
Well, this is a fairly long poem. This is one of the very few long ones that I've written, but it has a story behind it. My father died of brain cancer, and he loved learning things. He loved poetry. He loved literature of all sorts, and he loved language. And he did not let me mess up language by any means. Everything had to be said right. No mixed anything, and no syntax that was off key, no grammar that was broken. It had to, so like that. Learning bones. I'm learning bones to please my father's ghost. Cranium, maxilla, he knew them all and loved to reel them off, each Latin name sonorous and ornate, as from a tongue speaking the 19th century. He'd boast, his only vanity, total recall, mandibula, clavicula, and not one out of place, named wrongly or forgot, although learned long ago when he was young. Useless for me to argue that breastbone is really just as good and quite the same as sternum. On that point, he became stone. Gospeled by my own time, I worshipped use. What use was it, I jibed, to learn by heart in a dead language, static part by part? Better to know the function of the glands, for instance, which I knew he did not know, the mind's evasions, or the work of dreams. He didn't like my century. Obtuse almost to change, he couldn't trust what seems. He wanted things to be, and to be there, forever in their place, like arms and hands. Humorous, radius, ulna, do not flow beyond mind's grasp, like impulse or nightmare. He liked the rational, the decent look of bones in place, holding the flesh upright as bones do, as they seem to in his book. When Latin failed him, and the torment came that numbered and wrenched his bones as on a rack, he learned the flow of nightmare into night. The journey he took up has no returning, and no soft speech will bring soft answer back. But, clumsy, slow Aeneas, I am learning ilium, ischium, femur, a long prayer always descending earthward, rung by rung, fibula, metatarsus, to the ground, in whose disorder lies that careful man. Pious at last, I pray his sleep is sound. We make amends in any way we can.
Thank you.
You know, one thing that the listeners can't see, or I don't know if you would have heard it. The thing is this poem rhymes all the way through, but the pattern is so scattered. I mean, some lines are six lines away from where they rhyme,
Yeah.
and it's and that metaphorically works because we're trying. It's almost as though we've got these bones and we're trying to put them together to make almost like a archaeologist trying to put together the bones that she's, because she's learning bones. She has to at least put the names together with the bones, and it's a haphazard, slow process, and that's happening in the way the poem itself is made.
Mm, mm. Yeah, maybe it's an oversimplification, but for me, the 19th century was characterized by a kind of certainty that the 20th century could not continue. And the 21st century is not anywhere near to being up to the confusion of the 20th century. We're so far beyond it. But you can understand the urge, the desire to be able to make this kind of sense of anything, to take the 206 or 208 bones?
I don't know. Right.
It's one or the other. But to be, to say this is what they are. I mean, there's a kind of a certainty of that. Now, what we've learned in the time since is that we don't own something because we feel that we can own the word that is attached to it. That we cannot even be certain that the thing named and the name are always as tightly knit as we wish that they would be. And to go back to what you were saying, Alf, at the beginning of this conversation about people communicating and getting closer, we can never be sure that the words that mean this thing to us will mean the same thing to another. And so the uncertainty of that distance between the zero and where we are is something that's become more and more and more a hallmark of our daily lives and of the fabric of our consciousness, that there's so little that we can be certain of. And at this particular moment, so many of the things that we used to have a kind of conditional certainty of. We at least believed we were pretty certain. Those have all been washed away in an absolute avalanche of, of distortion.
And look what the speaker of this poem is trying to do. She thinks by all of this work she's doing that she will solve the problem of loss. She thinks that she will solve the problem of loss by putting these making amends any way she can. Not only solve the problem of loss, but solve the problem of this feeling of having failed someone who's gone now.
Mm-hmm.
She's going to solve, well, that is part of loss, of course. That is,
yeah.
So, yeah.
There's always something you should have done.
Yes, always.
In my house, it was language, because he wanted me to speak English outside the house if I felt like it. But inside the house, it had to be Spanish, and it had to be perfectly grammatical Spanish.
Yeah.
And no English insertions.
Well, but one language or another, he was also teaching you the importance of the exactitude that's required, the honor that you do the language by being exact. And that, of course, that's the skill that we have to bring to what we do. So it was very fundamental to the shaping of your whole approach, your whole personality, is that there's nothing slipshod about it.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we're all trying to do if we're going to write poetry at all, after all, is to get the right words in the right places in more ways than one, and you have to honor and respect them in order for them to assist you at all while you're trying to do this. And even then, sometimes they tell you, no, you can't do that. That's a very nice idea, but I won't let you do it. Say the words.
Right. But you keep trying.
Yeah.
There has to be some way to fix it, right? But
well,
no, there isn't.
Yeah. Well, that takes you back to, it was a novelist. It was Flaubert, who said, Madame Bovary is not finished. It's merely abandoned.
Yeah.
I can do no more. He wrote back to his publisher, who had sent him the galleys of Madame Bovary, and said, this is your last chance to make changes.
No.
And he said, what are you asking me? I look at this and I see something wrong with every page, every paragraph, every sentence, every line. What are you asking me? I can do no more. Take it with all its error.
And he did. And it was a very good thing to take, too.
And it was a good thing to take. So, yeah. Wow. Yeah, this is, it is about, this poem, to me, it is also, I mean, Alf, you're right. It's about, so what's the difference? Regret is what we have for things we didn't do. Remorse is what we have for things we did do. Is that right?
Yeah, yes, I think you're right.
Yes, that's correct. That's true.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think this is more a poem of regret.
Yeah.
Not that we're free to change either.
No.
We just live with them. But I found the next to last line simultaneously characteristic of you, Rhina, and also surprising. Because you describe yourself as pious at last.
Yeah, but that's pious, like in the Wordsworth poem, where pious means loyal to the parent. What is that great Wordsworth poem?
So it's piety. You mean piety? So filial piety is what you're talking about.
He called it filial piety, right? And that's what she's talking about here.
Yes, I mentioned Aeneas in line 3. This whole stanza is about Aeneas. I am learning Ilium, like
that's Troy.
Ischium, femur, which is, I start at the top of the head with the bones in the head, and,
right?
end with the feet. And what it really is he's in the ground now. And
Yes.
he's lying in that disorder because reality is disorder. There's nothing truly orderly about it. And he was a careful man. And I'm trying to be pious, but I don't know how pious I can be.
Well, that's why it surprised me, because you calling yourself pious by any definition of the word pious is unexpected. Let's put it that way.
That's right. You got it.
Okay. Well, as you know, there's room for us to differ, but I have my own definition of belief. That's how I get around. But anyway, um, sir, take it away.
Okay. I'm going to do the longest of my pieces. These are three sections. No, more, several sections taken from a long work that I did together with my sister Elise. And the reason why it's a favorite is because this is my favorite book. We made it together. She's a wonderful, wonderful artist, and we collaborated on it. We don't sell many of these books because they cost so much money, and if we
Yeah.
sell them, we lose money because
Yeah, they cost a lot to make.
what I make. But
Yes.
all right, so it's called Second Hand, Second Mind. You'll recognize this, Al, because Second Mind, if I had listened to my second mind, I would
Yes.
be sitting here wringing my hands and crying. But
Yeah.
but this is second hand because there's two hands at work, her hand and my hand. And my contributions are dream, this is straight from dreams, So this is from second hand, second mind. The only seats available are towards the front, not where I want to be, the basement of a church in a stifling dream. Long ago, the women here lost faith in their bodies, their prayers to outlast desire answered. A college debate. One speaker took the side of death, the large capitalized abstraction. Another spoke for the everyday kind of death. Behind the heavy curtains of the theater, a speckled fawn, still a moment, watching my eyes. As I reach out, she startles, hooves tangled in the red folds. An unmanageable baseball team, of which I am the manager, runs wild. My son aggravates a policeman with a paddle ball. I snap at my ex for telling something I've just got through telling her. Another officer lays her hand on my chest. We've got a problem here. A tour of the college. And this, I am told, is the decoy poetry room. People expect poetry activity here, but it happens somewhere else. So all of these pieces, they're taken from that collaboration, my collaboration with my sister Elise, who's a very close pal of mine, and she's an artist of national importance. So that in itself would make this poem a favorite of mine. But another reason that I like it, and this is it. I'm reading right. I have it written down here in front of me so I can say it right. She describes her art this way because artists always have to come up with these ways of describing their art,
Mm-hmm.
She looks scant at this kind of thing, but she does a good job. Her imagery centers on the overlooked, the ephemeral, and especially all that grows unmanaged along the margins of the physical world. And if that doesn't bring to mind Rhina's poem about the roadside apple trees, what else would? But so she and I have that in common. We keep returning to these marginal liminal spaces. And for me, that's the space between sleeping and
Yeah.
waking. That
Yes.
space of watchful sleep or dreamy wakefulness. Wallace Stevens called it the somnolent deep songs that rise up. So
Mm.
that's the kind of thing that is always to me it's so part of my poetic practice. Whenever I can get into that space, that's where I want to be.
Uh-huh.
So and it is just nice to have made that book with Elise. So that's why
Wow.
it's
Well, each of these, they're stanzas, although the viewer doesn't see them. They're in a long line on the page. Um, they have, to me, it's interesting to think about the kind of authority that each of these stanzas has, because it's a different kind of authority, because you're capturing that, you're working in that space you just described. It's like between, so it's dreamlike, but they're convincing as dreams. I don't know if they were or not. I don't know if they're made up by a fully conscious Alfred Nicole, or if you were given these at some point. But that's a question I'll have for you in a moment. But I feel their authority, and as I say, it's a different kind of authority than you would find in a news report, where that reality has been captured in a kind of a small way. This is kind of like an unreality that's captured in a in a small way. And but I buy them all. So where did they come from? Or I should say, how did they come to you?
well, that was literally the project. I had to immediately upon waking write down what I had seen. And but then my job as a that was my job as the researcher, but my job as the poet is, I mean, they're not metrical, then they're not syllabic, was to pare away everything that was unnecessary.
Yep.
Nothing but I just wanted to give you just the image. The thing that poems do, I mean, that dreams do, that poets also should do, is that they always translate everything into images. Dreams are that's already done. That's pre-made for you when you dream. Everything's already turned into an image. Because you can write it. You could write about love or loyalty or hatred or enmity. We can write about these poems about these abstractions, but you have to translate it into images.
Yep.
With dreams, they're already translated. They've already gone from abstraction to image. You know, you don't necessarily know what they're trying to tell you, but they do speak with great clarity.
Yeah, I think I can answer my own question with what you said about making sure that you pared away everything except the image. I think that is exactly where the authority that I feel in them comes from. That they are completely themselves. What they are, as opposed to their being completely themselves. The process by which you concentrated them and pared them down makes them completely themselves. And it is that sense of completeness that I find satisfying and convincing.
Yeah,
It, it, it,
the Dylan thing. There's no attempts to shovel the glimpse into the ditch of what each one means. There's nothing like I don't no analysis going on.
right, right.
That's poison.
Yeah,
It happens.
Yeah.
yeah. I was thinking about this morning, that when I was young, I placed a great emphasis on knowledge, because that was the currency that I could earn by my effort.
Yeah.
And then later on, I came to value other things more, character, wisdom, as opposed to knowledge. Um, and Einstein has a great quote about knowledge and imagination. He says, knowledge is important, but imagination is more important. And I think that the older I get, the higher and higher I place imagination. And what you've literally done is made the images. You are imagining.
Yeah, that's the root word of imagining. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that's why it has so much power for me. Because for me, no matter how well-spoken a person is and how clear her or his or their ideas are, what interests me is if they have an imagination and a sense of humor. If that makes sense.
What's funny is that idea that early pursuit of knowledge. I was trying to read those encyclopedias that you get at the grocery store.
Sure.
You'd get one, you'd get S this week and you'd get T
Yes.
and everything. And I thought that if I read them all, I would be, the equivalent of Aristotle or, but
Sure.
I don't know who Aristotle was, unless, well, maybe because I read the A's first.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a natural progression. I think that where you begin is with knowledge. In terms of when you begin accumulating, because you accumulate knowledge, whereas you have to either develop your imagination or you have to protect yourself from the destruction of your imagination because you're born with it developed. If that makes sense. Again, it's in the dreams that our imagination has a free reign.
But poetry, when it works backwards. Poetry
explain that, please.
Well, because if you start a poem with the knowledge, here's what I'm teaching you, or here's what I've learned, you're not giving the reader the important work to do.
Right.
The reader has to follow that hallway. It's a curvy hallway, and it has to go from music first to imagery the second, and then finally, if he's imaginative and he's working at it, he will get to the knowledge. But you can't start with it because that's like starting with the last line.
Yeah, it's like starting with this is the lesson for the day.
Yeah, right.
It's and in fact, if you go through all the stages that you just outlined, the reader will have the insight without your telling him.
He'll have it, but he won't care about it. Because what poetry adds is interest. The hallway itself is what's interesting. The passage from music to imagery to something else, that matters. I think the reader is not really engaged until he says, oh, that's where this guy is headed.
Interesting. Well, I'm not here to argue with you. I'm smarter than I look. Yeah, great. That's a very nice display also, Alf, of your range, because this is so different in some respects from the other work that you've read. So that's partly what guided me in my choices, was trying to show maybe sides of me that most of the poems I'm reading today I've never read aloud for various reasons. And they may mean a lot to me personally, but some of them are not practical. So what I want to do next actually is to read what, for me, although Rhina, you said you had a long one, this one is far longer than your long one, but there's a reason for it. And I'm really trying to give you my world as a child in this poem, and so there's quite a lot to it.
I got to say, before you even begin reading it, it really is worth a listen. This is a terrific. I love this thing.
Thank you. I've never read it because it's so long. You can't read it at a reading. That the little egg timer would would have
Well, not
exploded
at the open mic.
on the open mic if I ever tried to do this. But thank you in advance. But this was my childhood, and this shaped me as much as anything shaped me. It's called How to Play Scopa, which is to say why I tell stories. And so it's kind of a personal manifesto by way of memory. And Scopa, which is described in detail in the poem, is a Sicilian card game that I used to play with my grandfather, as you will see. It's Scopa is the old world name. In America, it's just called Scoop. We always played Scoop on the kitchen table. My nandu sat next to the window on my right. He had 100 hairs or so that stuck up, blunt and white, a quarter-inch above his scalp. He let me test their spring against my little palm. I saw and felt them bend, but otherwise his head was smooth. He had a hole I didn't ask about, up near the top, where something sharp had hit. He didn't roll his sleeves up, even in the heat. He liked to wear a woolen vest so coarse and brown it looked like pressboard, not like something woven out of something else. He kept his pocket watch and wooden matches in the vest pockets, in the green and red Parodi box in his left work shirt pocket, each dark cigar a chopped and twisted branch. I sat facing the wall, the kitchen clock above me. I was looking down. 4 cards lay face up on the metal tabletop, white, black, and red. The numbers, faces, shapes of suits stood out in sharp relief against the table pattern's light and darker browns. Lupini beans sat in a shallow dish between us. In another lay the shells of eaten ones. He showed me how to bite. First, picking up a coin-shaped bean between my thumb and finger. Wet and slippery, it jumped at gentle pressure. Holding firm enough to bring it to me, little hole pointing away, the round front half protrudes. The top front teeth, a delicate maneuver, incising through the skin but stopping at the level of the flesh. Then, pressing down with thumb and index fingertip, I popped the golden morsel in my mouth and chewed. The waxy-looking skins dropped in the pile. He had a glass of Zinfandel, a wine he made down in the basement in the cool back room, the walls covered with flags cut out of magazines. America. I helped sometimes by picking stems and seeds out of the mash. I had a glass of ginger ale, a little wine to color it. We ate and drank, and in his broken English, he told me Sicilian stories while we played game after game of Scopa. He would deal 3 cards to each of us, and 4 face up between us. Learning strategy was easy. Pick up cards. The diamonds when you could, the 7s too, and 6s in the other suits to make primera once the cards had all been dealt. Queens, jacks, and kings played in the places of 8s, 9s, and 10s. They were pulled out before we started play and waited patiently for solitaire. You picked up cards by sums. Your 7 took a 5 and deuce. And if you couldn't pick, you put 1 down. When you could sweep the table, you got an extra point. You put the card face up to mark it in your pile. You learned to tempt the future with your attitude. Your manner as you picked up cards suggested the rolling of the waves against the shore. They all must come to you deliberately. When I was in the spirit, I would sweep card after card my Nandu would put down. He was delighted I could be so strong. He told me once, about a boy and girl, brother and sister, who were orphaned young. Their dying mother made the brother swear that he would bear his younger sister on his shoulders everywhere they went so she'd be safe. And so he carried her for years as they both grew, her knees around his neck. One day she spied a fellow in the crowd at market. "Let me down," she said. "I like that boy. And from the way he looks at me, he likes me too." "I promise not to let you off my shoulders until you have grown," he said. "You're still too light." But she'd begun to plan and signaled to the boy above her brother's head. "Then take me to a field," she said. "I have to answer nature's call." The boy followed behind them at a distance and watched. The brother picked up stones and threw them out into the tall grass of a field, and birds flew up. "You may get down. No one is out there. Hurry up and come right back," the brother said. "Next day by the same field?" she asked again. This time the lover hid out in the tall grass, holding captured birds. And when the brother threw the stones, he let the birds fly up. Soon after came the girl, and they did what they wanted in the grass. As time went by, the brother noticed that his sister grew a little heavier each week. "I'm carrying a child," she said. "How can this be?" he said. "I have a lover. This proves I'm old enough," she said. "You've kept your promise to our mother. Put me down." I shuffled and I dealt. The game went on. At 6, I played my nanu even. Why did he tell stories? To distract, to teach, to entertain? We never spoke of morals. He didn't teach a lesson, but I learned. You told the stories that you knew, the ones given to you, for joy of company, for joy of telling, as I'm doing now.
Yeah, so cool. So cool. I mean, I just want to launch about this. Look what happens in this first stanza with that thing. He had 100 hairs or so that stuck up, blunt and white, a quarter inch above his scalp. He let me test their spring against my little palm. I mean, that isn't taking us in there. We're absolutely there. We're touching
Yes.
the people there, you know. And then it doesn't stop there. It keeps on going. There's so much, but the little green and red perotti boxes and each dark cigar a chopped and twisted branch. I know that because the kids were using those are weird looking little cigars, you know.
And they're terrible. They're so strong. They're horrible things.
Just tell us about it. You drew us into the hall.
Yeah.
Yes.
We walked through there.
Oh God.
Yeah.
And then and you had the ginger ale with a little wine to color it and stuff. And then but the whole thing is it does what it's talking about, because you got this story from him and you tell it again. And what a story it is. This is such a wonderful classic story. It's a beautiful story, you know.
Isn't it? I mean, that's exactly as he told it to me.
And how you check out I know how to check if there's anyone out there. I'll throw some rocks there, and the birds will fly up, and then the sneaky guy came up with a way of making even that. It's so tremendous.
Yeah, thanks. Well, again, that's the story he told, and God knows it probably goes back 1,000 years. But one of the details I like about the story is that the girl is like motioning to the lover because she's the brother can't see her doing it because she's on his shoulders.
And the notion of spending your life on somebody's shoulder to keep you safe.
Yes.
This is it's deadly. It's deadly, that idea. And she takes care of it and she saves herself.
Yes. Yeah. It's old. That's old world wisdom.
It's a marvelous poem.
Well, thank you. And I mean, I owe it all to we're only as good as our inspiration. I love my grandfather so much, and you can see why. Yeah, he was amazing. Um, and he was also the music lover in the family. He was the first of the Sicilian immigrants in the part of town where they lived to buy a gramophone, and he had records.
Squeezing you.
No, no, no.
People would come to his house to listen to records because no one else had a gramophone. And he also had a band, and he used to make instruments. He carved. He used to make bamboo flutes. He would make them by hand, and I have a couple of flutes that he made. Um, and he would drill the holes, and I don't know how they knew, but they're the right distance apart to make the scale notes, and you could play it. And apparently he had a little band that would play at weddings and things like that. And so he's really where the music comes from in my family, because my parents were not musical at all, and they didn't even own records, basically. So he's key. But thank you for listening to that, because as I say, I've never read it.
Oh, you should read more often.
Yeah, it's really wonderful.
You should.
Well, thanks, but you can see it is long.
Not that long, really.
Oh, no.
You could. I bet you it took 6 minutes at the most, and now I bet probably not that. That's
Yeah.
You can read that.
Yeah, it's not. I don't worry that it's too long to listen to, because there's so much going on. You're not aware of the passage of time.
Yeah, especially
But-
when you get to that story. Whoa.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so hidden. It's so beautifully hidden in delightful details.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you had done that like a good journalist, you would have said, there are ways in which people can trick others into blah, blah. And that is death on wheels.
Where's the flavor in that?
Yeah, I know. This is why poetry tells it backwards, because it's so much more interesting.
Yeah. Well, so this is
grandfather did it.
This is what storytelling. This is why. I mean, that hooked me completely into the value. The value of story. And I, my songs are stories. When I wrote novels, they were stories. The poems are story. I mean, that's kind of where I begin. Is in narrative. So, and this is where it comes from. So you can see why I felt I should read it. So, as I say, thank you very much for your kind words, and particularly your patience. Let's go.